everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on digitalization SME. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. Rob. Mr. Rob, what you want to share about digitalization? Especially we want to focus on small medium enterprise, how they can
Well,
do digitalization.
right. So SMEs, small to medium enterprises, typically have issues with regard to a lack of IT support, particularly in the small side. IT may be done by somebody part-time, if at all, if it's not just spread across all the employees and executive management handles it. You get the medium-sized enterprises, you start to get the basics for IT, but it's still a relatively small, poorly researched group. And it isn't until you get to large enterprise, you get decent-sized IT staff, fully staffed, also often underfunded, but at least they've got the resources to do an awful lot of research. And they in many cases in the large enterprise space, they can have equipment built for them economically, as opposed to going to an OEM and have them building them, depending on their size. So on the SME side, you're dealing with a lack of IT support, which is fairly significant, and that means it's relatively hard to have the extra bandwidth to do the analysis that you need to understand what it is you need to digitize first and how you need to do that. And so probably the best step probably is to bring on board a set of consultants that are loyal to you, not to any one vendor, and have them lay out a plan. You're going to need to understand the areas where you've got the greatest friction, where you have the least efficiency, because those will probably be the low-hanging fruit for digitalization. You'll get the most benefit in areas that can be digitized, that are very labor-intensive, not particularly efficient, and you need to discover where those are, where those gore points are, where those critical where your critical processes are being slowed down. And if you can digitize those first, then you may free up some resources to be able to do the rest. But you have to be very measured. This isn't something where you start with the technology and then you go searching for a problem. Before you start to digitize anything, you really need to know your enterprise. In other words, where the efficiencies are, where the inefficiencies are, where the critical paths are, where the dependencies are in particular, so that when you bring on board a set of consultants that will help you choose the technology that you need, you can articulate all those key points. So the assets that you bring on board, those consultants you bring on board, can give you their advice knowledgeably. By the way, it's good to understand, at least have a real-time map of where your critical problems are at all times. Because you when you've got an outage, or if you've got a catastrophic failure, that map will come in handy as you bring back up the enterprise, as far as highlighting what you bring up first, and what can take a little bit of time, because as I say, you're undoubtedly understaffed, and if you've got a critical outage, you're going to need to focus whatever staff you've got on the biggest problem. But if you understand where your dependencies are, you understand where your low-hanging fruit is, those processes that are extremely inefficient. And by the way, finally, you understand how much budget you've got and how much executive support you've got to do the project in the first place. I've seen a lot of these things fail catastrophically because everything's done properly, but they don't have executive support, and executives have no idea, and the board has no idea how much the effort's going to cost, and they fail to fund it. And so early on, you do need to get a sense of what the tolerance is for the cost and the level of support you've got, because if you lack the support, you'll fail. And if you lack the budget, you're going to fail. So knowing those up front will let you know whether it's even worth going down this particular path until you've got that support and that budget in place. So those are my opening comments. It's particularly hard to digitize an SME, primarily because of the lack of resource. And you can simplify that a lot by planning, sometimes over planning, before you engage consultants and actually start to choose hardware. Just remember, you don't start with the hardware, you start with a problem, and then you back into the hardware and software you're going to use to fix it.
Thank you. Now I request Mr. Daniel, what you want to discuss about SME, and if you define the small medium enterprise according to US market, maybe our emerging economy can understand what will be the size of SME, like financially, how big they are.
Yeah, great topic, Sharif, and great overview of the question there, Rob. Uh, Small businesses really are the engine of any country's economy. I think if you look at the stats, more than half of the work hiring and the value creation is done by companies with 50 people or less. So those would be considered small to medium enterprises, and they are the ones that really need to leverage the power of digital technology. One of my favorite examples of the initiation of digital technology was the digital twin, which was something that NASA kind of pioneered in the early days of space flight development. And they realized that they could use the digital world as a sandbox before they made mistakes in the physical world. And this is, only going to get bigger and more important for organizations to incorporate. The digital twin concept is really one of the top strategic technologies, and basically you want to cover the entire life cycle of a process or an asset, in the digital world. So you can fail there instead of failing in the real world with real world consequences. But there's going to be a cost to finding experts that are conversant with digital twinning and digitization technology. So you're of course going to have also security concerns to deal with. And one way to alleviate those security concerns is by greater use of metadata. There are ways to attach metadata to all aspects of security related files, and you can kind of create a kind of a self-policing ecosystem by logging all the things that are potentially dangerous security wise, because really for every hack there's a crack, as the old slogan of penetration testers and hackers. Hopefully these are ethical hackers that you're dealing with, so-called white hat hackers, but you need to constantly run red team blue team simulations to see if your digital technology is vulnerable. uh, Again, you can take these steps like tying metadata to each piece of information. And you also want to um, well, for the really small people, let's look at whether you should be an employee or an employer. That's kind of where it all starts. Here in California, we have I think in all of the U.S. there's something called the Small Business Administration, and they offer counseling from retired executives. There's something called the core of retired executives, I think is the acronym. But they will let you take a free evaluation to see if you got the attributes that are friendly to becoming an entrepreneur. Not everyone will make a good entrepreneur. Some people just want to put in their 8 hours and cash a paycheck and go home and relax. But if you have these attributes that an entrepreneur has, then you can, of course, become much more wealthy than a simple employee. Yeah, but it's going to be a lot of sacrifice. You have to have a mind that loves to be engaged with challenge. You have to be willing to put in overtime, solving problems. There's lots of attributes. You have to be a good leader. You have to be a systematic thinker. So I would encourage people to see if they have those attributes, because we are moving away from an economy that's going to be employer-employee relationships, and uh, you should think in terms of providing your services to the world as your own boss. And actually, there's digital techniques that can aid in that exploration too. So it's not a subject that I'm super expert in, but those are some initial thoughts that I wanted to share. And thanks.
Thank you. When we discuss about digitalizations, do you believe this small medium enterprise can get more benefit when they take, like when they involve with digitalizations, or what type of feature they should use to enhance the capacity of their business process? Mr. Rob.
I want to clarify something though. And first, let's start with SME size. SME size is typically 30 to 250 employees. That's the medium size is typically over 150, and then considered small below 150. Some people cut it under 100. But that's kind of the range, because you get about 200, over 250 employees is considered outside of SME, and under 30 is really mom and pop shop. So we don't consider those enterprises. Not sure why. It seems pretty arbitrary to me, but that's the way we define it. What was your question again?
What type of benefit actually SME get through digitalization?
Well, it really depends on the SME. It's going to be different depending on the business you're in. But typically, what it does is it reduces labor cost. I mean, that's what you're doing. You're automating. And so as you digitize and automate, then it reduces your labor cost. Sometimes what it does is it just frees up people. If you digitize an overworked and underfunded department, suddenly those people can do more than they were able to do, because typically if they're underfunded and understaffed, all they're doing is blocking and tackling. They're not able to do any innovation. They're not able to really think outside the box. And good luck getting them to implement anything new. They just don't have the bandwidth. And so if you can digitize or automate much of that function, you can free up bandwidth, and those people can now do what they want. It's one of the big examples I've got of what happens when you go in and you fully digitize a function. Is often you may lose some jobs, but you'll often find that suddenly the people are able to do things that they've wanted to do that needed to be done for a long time, but they just didn't have the bandwidth to do it because they were just constantly fixing problems and not able to really advance the function. And so by digitizing, if you do it smart, by digitizing, you can reduce the load on those resources and free them up to do other things. And in some cases, you can reduce headcount. Really kind of depends on what you want to do. So if you fully digitize and automate a call center these days to bring in generative AI, you can probably get rid of 90% of the people. And what you're left with is a function that works 24/7, never gets tired, never gets angry, never mouths off against employee, never has substance abuse problems, and all the typical things you have with staffing. So, but it depends on the function. In Japan, they've been digitizing restaurant workers for a while, and some of the restaurants are fully automated. And the Japanese love it. I'm not sure that would work in many other economies, but at least in Japan, that was the way they dealt with food. So in some restaurants, not all. So it depends on the business. As I said before, your first step is to really understand where your need is and understand where your dependencies are, and then you've got the basis to bring in a consultant to make things happen. Now, if you're on the small side, may very well be that you might want to, as you think about staffing your board, to make sure one of the board members understands technology reasonably well, comes out of the technology side, and they can provide the advice to at least get you started. One of the biggest issues with digitalization is the fact that often you've got people that don't understand it, trying to articulate what it is they want, and then they spend 5, 6, 10 times the amount of money they should have spent to get 50%, 30%, 20% of the benefit that they might have otherwise received. So it's really important that planning is done up front, and it's done well. Because if you do it poorly, technology is expensive, and if you have to uninstall it or discard it prematurely, that's just lost cost, lost money. And so the more you can do to fully understand the deployment before you go out and bid the project or look for a partner to install it. If you're small, you're probably going to be using a firm that actually comes with consultants. But my advice is not to really start with the consultants that come with a firm you're hiring, because they're going to prefer their own products and offerings. And if you use consultants that are outside a company, they're inside a company, they will tend, it's like the old saying, if you're a factory that makes hammers, everything looks like a nail. So your first step really is to have some type of a consultant relationship with somebody that's not tied to any of the vendors to help you make your initial selection. And then once you've chosen a vendor, you can use their consultants to help you install. They'll know that technology as well, if not better than anybody else. But it's that selection side that you need to be really careful with, because you pick the wrong vendor, you pick the wrong technology, and it's not going to end well. And particularly if you pick the wrong, that if you start working on the wrong side of the company, one of the reasons you need to understand the dependencies is if you automate one part of a function without understanding its impact on others, you could actually create greater inefficiencies. Using a factory example, for instance, if you were manufacturing the underlying parts and you were to automate a parts part of the company without automating the overall line, suddenly you're starting to warehouse thousands of parts that you can't install because the line can't take them fast enough. And so you really need to look at your critical paths and make sure that you're keeping things in balance as you advance, and working on those things that are damaging the critical path, that are causing a slowdown in your company, because those things will provide the greatest positive impact if you digitize them. If you take something that's already relatively efficient and it's not part of the critical path at the moment, it's not causing a delay or a problem, and you digitize that, you won't see much benefit because the things that are causing the lag in production will still be there and still be causing that lag. And so that's why it's critical you understand the overall dynamics of your company before you even start down this path, because if you do it any other way, you're probably going to be introducing more inefficiencies and avoidable costs than you will be solving problems. This is something you really need to play heads up ball with. And that means at some way, shape, or form, you need to bring in, if you don't have the expertise in the house, and SMEs rarely do, you need to bring people in. Another warning, this is where Dunning-Kruger plays a really big role, where people often think that they are experts in stuff they have absolutely no knowledge about, and will make horrible mistakes in terms of how they select technology. Give you an example. In a firm I was working in as an analyst, I was the telecom analyst, and we installed a relatively expensive telecom system, and I was riding along with the head of the director of analyst relations, director of analysts in the company, and in effect my boss's boss. And I groused about the fact that they selected a telecom system that was absolute crap, and I knew that was absolute crap because I'd been the competitive analyst on that system. And I told the company that if they brought it out, it was going to put the company under, and it did. And that's the one we bought. And so I told the guy that wanted to know who the idiot was that selected the system. And of course, wouldn't you know it, it was that guy that had selected the system. So a little cautionary tale in my own case, I survived it, and he was gone long. In fact, he was gone, and I made it to when the company was bought. But it is important to showcase that. A lot of times when you go into these technology things, people will start talking inside the company like they're experts, and they are not. And the more certain they are and the more expert they seem, the less expert they actually are. And that's where things get expensive. That's when you end up buying the wrong stuff, getting the wrong services, getting the wrong software, and you end up having to undo and redo all of it. And SMEs aren't exactly cash rich. They tend to run pretty close to the ragged edge, and that means you really can't afford a lot of mistakes. And that's why planning is important, and making sure that the experts you've got are truly experts. They're not just experts in their own head. They're not poster children for Dunning-Kruger, and they actually know what it is they're talking about. By the way, when choosing an expert, it's not only important to have an expert that is independent from the vendors, but you need an expert that understands your business. Hopefully they've done these kinds of projects before for other similar sized, similar type businesses, so they can understand some of the problems that have historically been made and help you avoid them. Bringing in an expert that say might be an expert in large scale construction when you're you're a 100-person healthcare provider, that's not going to end well. Primarily because they just won't know anything about your business. They won't understand the mistakes that you're going to make because they've never seen them before. And one of the big benefits of a consultant is helping you avoid costly mistakes. But if they're learning on your job, then you're paying the freight for that education, and that's expensive education. Learning on the job is probably the most expensive way to learn anything. It's much better to learn from the experience of others, and so that initial consultant you bring on board is so critical to helping you make the initial decisions you need to make, not only on what products you're going to select, but how to do the initial analysis to decide where you're going to focus the effort in the first place. And I'll pass to Dan.
Mr. Dan.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons for that Dunning-Kruger effect is the Peter principle, which, if you haven't heard about that, that's people tend to get promoted up the hierarchy to their level of competence. And right when they're kind of quasi-competent at the job, that's kind of where they stay. So in these hierarchies, you tend to get people that think they're better than they are, and they're barely able to perform what they're assigned to do. So you want to watch out for that. One way corporations can do that is to intensively cross-train people. So if someone, basically everyone in the organization, I'm not saying totally everyone, but as much as possible, you should have people able to fill in for other people's job roles in the organization. That's a valuable thing. And you can digitize the competency cycling. You can have rapid learning objects that I helped develop for one environmental company in conjunction with these are ways to test periodically if you're still certified to do a function. The military, actually, the Department of Defense has a program called CTEP, Comprehensive Employment Training Protocol. So they have a way to say, hey, look, your certification is about to expire. You need to, do these processes to stay current with your certification. So that's one thing to leverage in organizations. The other thing is not to do too much self-performing of things. Don't go outside your core competencies. A lot of businesses tend to be very admin heavy, and the people that are actually bringing in the billables for the company are outnumbered by the administration side 10 to 1. That's kind of a red flag in an organization. Another thing that is just starting to be leveraged is geospatial or location data, especially real-time location data. And there's so much of it out there. I mean, we're mostly familiar with Google Maps. You can look at Street View, you can look at satellite view, you can look at all these different layers of information on a Google map. And that's basically what's called GIS, Geographic Information Systems. And it's important to consider having a GIS expert in a house if you don't have one for your business. Some ways that location data is being used, marketers were kind of the first people to get a hold of this because they want to know where their target market is, what the demographics is of their customer base. But then also the customer experience can be enhanced by using location data. You've got geo-marketing, targeted communications, and these apply. I'm looking at a chart, and this has the percentages for financial services, retail and e-commerce, transport and logistics, real estate, travel and tourism, which of course is a big one for geolocation data. But in those 5 categories, they've got pretty impressive percent of people are responding that real-time location data is helping them for things like zone-based pricing, something you might not think about, where you want to, sometimes the federal government will have what's called hub zones. So these are historically underutilized business zones where they say, here's an area that's kind of depressed. We want to attract entrepreneurs into there. We're going to give them preferential business climate things like reduced price for the renting the office space for the business, or we're going to waive some taxes or waive some kind of government fees, so they can create these hub zones or enterprise zones. And that's a very location driven thing. So that kind of fits into the zone based pricing. Route planning and optimization. I think it was UPS that figured if their drivers only made right turns, they could save a whole bunch of money on gas, because a lot of their drivers were waiting at left turn things where they had cross traffic, and they're sitting there burning a lot of gas. But you can get anywhere you need to get with just right turns, it turns out, and that's kind of a location thing that you can digitize and map out. You can support workforce coverage optimization, network supply chain optimization, geo-marketing, targeted communications. All these things can benefit from digital location intelligence. And sometimes that can be real time. Even you can have real time updates about what's going on in different locations. But that is where that's one of the big 6 in journalism. Who, what, why, when, where, how. And businesses need to answer all those questions, and they can the more they can answer them in real time and with better digital intelligence, the more successful that they're going to be. So take a look at GIS if your business isn't using it. I think that's part of the information revolution that hasn't been fully developed yet.
Thank you. Mr. Rob and Delhi, when we discuss about SME, that time we have to understand that we have a lot of economical challenges. So do you believe that if the digitalization process, any country's government help the small medium enterprise, then it will be helpful for the SME to go global and make good business? Or how the SME, the small medium enterprise, now they can survive, or what type of subsidy they can get from government? I want to more focus on policy development.
Well, it really depends on the country. The subsidies that are available for businesses tend to be country specific, and sometimes they come with rather substantial requirements, long-term requirements. In some cases, if they're location-based subsidies, they may require you to stay in that location for a period of time, even though that location may not be ideal for your business. Whether you're digitizing a company or looking for help from government, you do need to have kind of a long-term plan. What is it you want to do over the next 10 to 15 years? The reason is because when you're digitizing, you're buying any technology, you're not buying it for today. Because you buy it today and you're a growing business, it's going to be obsolete tomorrow. You need to buy for tomorrow. You're buying for the capability that you want to have. I would say at least 5 years out. And same thing with looking for government subsidies. You at least want to be looking 5, if not 10 years out, and making sure you're not tying yourself to a set of requirements that are going to damage your business long term. The government has a significant number of needs and requirements that may be very different than your own, and you need to understand those differences to make sure you don't lock yourself into a contract that you immediately regret. It really does. It depends on the business. It depends on the government. This is not something you can just say cookie cutter. Yeah, take whatever subsidy you can get. This is something where you really need to sit down, like any financial arrangement, and determine whether the benefits exceed the problems you're going to have. It does require you to think this through, because, as I say, often with subsidies, they come with strings, and you need to understand the detriment that comes with those strings to make sure that it's worth getting that money. It may come with hiring requirements. For instance, here in the United States, we have often with subsidies, they're forced diversity requirements, which is fine if you've got a diverse hiring pool to pull from. But let's say you're in an area like AI where the resources aren't particularly diverse at the moment, and now you're required to carry a 30% diversity load. Where are you going to get those people? It's not that you don't want to do it. It's just the people aren't, particularly minorities that have these skills, are incredibly expensive, and you may not be able to afford them simply because the pool's too shallow. So, and being an SME, you can't fix it. A large enterprise can do things like fund schools, fund diversity programs in education. You can't do that. You're slipstreaming all those efforts, and recognize when a large enterprise does this stuff, they want to do it because they want to solve their own diversity requirements. They're not doing it to help you out unless you're a partner and the diversity program carries on into partners, which is interesting. And here's the case where if you're a supplier, you may actually look up to the companies that you're supplying, the larger enterprises that you're supplying, and look to them for help. For instance, with Hewlett Packard, they're driving their diversity efforts, the diversity, inclusion, and sustainability efforts down through their partnership group with incentives, and those incentives can be valuable. So learning what those are can help you accomplish the goals that you might otherwise find expensive to accomplish. But in all cases, if you don't know what they are, if you haven't thought them through or thought through the benefits and detriments of those particular programs, you're not going to be well positioned to take advantage of them. And you may find that taking advantage even of some of those programs could end up being detrimental, depending on where you are and what the underlying costs and hiring capabilities are in the region that you're occupying. So it's in all cases, it's important to walk into those relationships with your eyes open, read the small print, make sure you're not signing up for something that may sound great this year, but it's going to put you under in 2 or 3 years. because you don't need that kind of load, and you certainly don't need those kinds of problems, and you don't need that regret. So in all cases, whether you're picking going down the path of digitalization, or you're looking for subsidies, or even if you're just borrowing money from a bank, or looking for equity funding, where you're selling stock, you really need to think of the implications of all of those paths to acquiring funds and making sure that you're going to survive it. Give you an example. Michael Dell wanted to do a lot of things at Dell, and he had to take the company private before he was allowed to do them. He's since gone public again, because he found that being private created real problems with employee, especially executive comp. But the end result was a very expensive process to go private, because he couldn't do what he wanted to do as a public company. And as an SME, even though in many cases you won't be public, if you're a corporation and you start selling your stock, those people gain power, and they may not have the same vision for your company that you have. And particularly if who's buying the stock is another large company, you may suddenly find that company has decided they're going to buy you, and now you have no ability to defend against a hostile takeover. And a lot of these companies just buy for assets, and so it's not like they're going to buy you, give you a cushy job as an executive and let you continue on. They may simply want your IP. So suddenly you're unemployed. Yeah, you've got some money, but not as much as you would have wanted. And if your dream was to build the company, that dream is now gone. So do recognize with regard to any type of funding you get, there are strings, and you need to understand those strings to see if you can tolerate the downside to that funding type, and government subsidies are no exception.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel.
Well, something that I think often gets neglected in the field of digitization and doing business is people don't look at how they will be impacted by potential catastrophes or disasters or various possible interruptions. A classic one is your data backup. Are you doing a offsite backup on a regular basis? A lot of companies aren't doing this. So if their building burns down, they could get put out of business potentially with an event like that. There's a partnership between business, and I believe the FBI has something called InfraGuard, which is for infrastructure protection. And I would encourage more businesses to have they actually call it a business management plan, which deals with these adverse events, which unfortunately seem like they're becoming more and more common. You look at the civil unrest that happened in France just recently, and that a lot of societies and cities are kind of powder kegs, just waiting for an event to trigger some kind of civil disturbance, or the power grid going out. We're in an area of the solar maximum now, and the sun is becoming very active, and the power grid is especially vulnerable to these streams of highly charged particles from the sun. So how will your business be impacted if the grid goes out? Will you be able to come back online, or even keep doing business during some kind of incident? There's a interesting project that's kind of a companion to the seed bank on Svalbard, a tiny island up in the Arctic Circle that Norway has the vault of seeds, where all these different kinds of seeds are being stored in the right climate controlled conditions. But now there's a companion project where there's an information vault, and actually information is being digitized. It's kind of like a QR code kind of digitization, but it's on film. It can last like 1,000 years, and there's a company that provides this digitization service. It's not really cheap, but it's reasonably priced. But that's something to think about if you want to back up your truly important information in some way that will resist civilization disrupting events. I think the Sumerians kind of had us beat, because they had these little clay tablets with their stylus, and some of those are still around. And if you can read cuneiform, you can still read about the grain transaction and the guy that was complaining about the grain was spoiled or got wet and all these. But we should think about having more human readable kinds of backups. I mean, if you didn't have a computer, all this QR code data in the Norwegian information vault isn't going to be particularly useful. But you can actually shrink something down on a piece of film and make a water drop magnifier. Just make a little loop in a wire, put a water drop in there, and now you've got something that will magnify what the human eye can see, a couple dozen times. So you could actually read tiny microfilm printed materials this way. So is this an esoteric stuff? Well, I mean, it has happened before that businesses have been disrupted, and it'll happen again. There's one of the fastest growing officer positions in a business called the Chief Sustainability Officer. And they are tasked with the mission of, will this business be in business 15 years from now? Is our business model something that is going to survive all the disruptions and transitions to renewable energy and to pollution regulation? So the typical business is generally looking just a few quarters out. Are we going to be profitable? But the longer view you can take with your business or with your civilization or your personal lifestyle, I think it's very expeditious. And most people, like the saying goes, they don't plan to fail, they fail to plan. So the same holds true for business, and there's plenty of digital tools that can do this kind of unexpected contingency planning that is unfortunately not done enough. So that would be my comment for now. Thanks. I hope that wasn't too far off afield.
Thank you, Mr. Rob. I like how people can improve their skill for digitalizations when they have to perform for SME.
Well, the best way to improve the skill for digitalization is get involved in doing them. It's as I mentioned before, it's important to have people on the team that have done this before, and then you're not learning by doing. You want to learn from other people's mistakes, not your own. But if you're in an SME and you're talking about studying it, that's a little harder. You could certainly do research, go into another company of the same type. A lot of firms, a lot of verticals have groups that get together. If you're in healthcare, there are conferences where you can meet other like people that are in healthcare. If you're in hospitality, there are conferences where you can meet other like people in hospitality. If you're in retail, there are conferences where you can meet other like people in retail. Get to know them, develop those relationships, and often you can share knowledge with those people. What experiences did they had? What consultants did they use? What problems did they run into? Those are things that are critical to your practice. You can't really go back to school and do this because typically education is decades behind industry, and with technology, decades it's a lifetime. So it's not like you can go back to class. You might be able to go to a 2-year school, a technical school, and get a little closer. But honestly, the best way to do this is from other companies that are in the process of or just completed their own similar digitalization efforts. And if you create a large enough network of people in your own industry, and everybody should have a network of people that are in their own industry that they can ask questions of, that they can ask you questions of what you're doing, and you can ask them questions of what they're doing, and feel comfortable in doing so. And that's where you're probably going to gain your greatest insights, is by talking to that knowledge base, that brain trust that you build over time, and asking them what their experiences were and asking for the help in doing it. Another resource is people that have recently retired, and I say recently, like retired in the last year or so. They may still be relatively current. Older retirees, because technology moves so quickly, will drop out of knowledge relatively quickly unless they stay current through some other practice, and some do. But you need somebody that has recent knowledge, because even something as old as 2 years ago may not apply today. And the technology is moving so incredibly fast. And products typically refresh themselves on an annual basis, and some even faster than that, biannual basis as well. And certainly we've seen with some of the core technologies, processors and the rest, they can actually change even more quickly depending on what we're talking about. So it is important that you're talking to people that just recently completed. And by the way, it's a good time to also, when you're in the product selection phase, and you have it, and you've come down to say your top 3 vendors. Here's again a case where you can use that brain trust and find out who else has used those vendors and use their experiences in your region to couch your decision. Because it doesn't do good to buy the best technology if in your region or locality there's no support for it, or if the people that are in your region or locality are kind of assholes. And no company, no provider has, at least not right now, has equal employees every place. I remember meeting with one of my larger clients some time back, and they were talking about bringing on a consultant with regard to advertising in that particular case. And the consultant and the company itself was well renowned, doing major campaigns for some of the most powerful, most well regarded campaigns on the planet. But the team that they were going to get wasn't that team. It was a completely different team, and so they realized they weren't going to get the benefits that they thought they were hiring this very expensive firm to do. And that's where it's important to really look at the firm and make sure that the team that you're getting, the team that operates in your area, is the one that's really doing the great work, and you're not getting the team that maybe just decided being fired and has a poor relationship with companies and has a bit of a history of being a walking disaster. And so it's really important to make sure that you have those relationships. SMEs really can't do it themselves. Though I should point out, even large enterprises, the folks that are most successful are the ones that have a decent contact list of people that are in their field, in similar companies that are going through similar problems, who they can talk to, discuss their issues with, and collaboratively solve some of those problems. IT groups tend to be a bit more cooperative with each other than some of the other groups. For instance, in engineering and some of the other things, cooperation across companies is discouraged because of the risk of IP leakage. But in IT, you can get quite a bit of cooperation across companies, because IT doesn't consider itself to be that competitive. It can change, it can be different. And being aware of the policies as you do this is important. I'm aware of the fact that one of the biggest and most interesting cases I reviewed with a pharmaceutical company was one where the people working on a project, and this was when cloud resources first became available, they'd gone to their own IT department and said, listen, we need resources to do this project. And IT said, okay, we can get you the resources. Timeline is 12 months. Cost is probably $1.2 million, and we'll and you'll be ready to be able to do the research you need to do. And the group went to a cloud provider, and for around $20,000, they were able to complete the project in under a month, and they received a significant award for doing it. I mean, massive money savings, how fast they did it, and then the following day they were terminated. And the reason they were fired is because the cloud resource was located in Russia, and this IP analysis they did was highly confidential, and nobody could figure out what happened to the data. They couldn't secure the data; it was on some server in Russia. And so you really have to understand some of the dynamics and make sure that these kinds of lessons are learned by others and not learned by yourself. Nobody wants to be fired, particularly right after you received a huge award and recognition. But that can happen if you do some of this stuff without experience. And so that brain trust, those contacts are invaluable if in fact the company allows them. But making sure the company will allow them up front is important, because you don't want to solve one problem and only be hit by a much larger one that causes your termination. Intellectual property theft is a real thing, and concerns around it are real as well. And depending on your industry, that may prevent you from having the kind of relationships you might otherwise be advised to have. I don't see a huge problem typically in hospitality and areas like that, but in development and sometimes in healthcare, if it's a research university or hospital, you can have some much heavier restrictions. And clearly in healthcare, when it comes to to client patient information, there are huge restrictions on movement and sharing that you've got to be aware of. Bringing somebody else in to look at the data or look at a problem that hasn't been properly vetted could be problematic. So you do need to understand some of the dynamics of this, but generally in IT, you're pretty safe. Just make sure that if you're one of the exceptions, you know you're one of the exceptions before you get engaged in that kind of a process.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel.
Yeah, another thing I think businesses should really use in the digital domain is expert systems. We might remember various failed attempts at expert systems. There was, I think, Ask Jeeves was an early one that Microsoft rolled out. But it's some of them have taken off. Like Quora is very, very popular. You can go on there and describe your expertise and volunteer to answer questions, and you can actually get reputational rewards and things for using this. But it would be good for businesses to have an in-house knowledge base to run their own sort of question and answer expert system software. I don't think enough businesses do this. The first there's actually two divisions of these question and answer systems. There's an inference engine and the knowledge base. Those are the two components of an expert system. So the knowledge base would represent your facts and rules. The inference engine would apply the facts and rules to known facts to deduce new facts. And then they can also, inference engines can also have explanation and debugging abilities. And you could also integrate this with a chatbot that, every good website should be able to have some kind of presence there that can answer interested person's questions, because the way customers are, if they have a very short attention span, if they don't get help, they'll just move on to another source for what they're seeking. So 24/7 chatbot on a social media site or a website, coupled to a knowledge base, an expert system, that could provide this kind of digital capacity for an organization. So that's something that you want to look at bringing in if you don't have it already at your organization. I'll just land the plane there for now. Thanks.
Mr. Rob, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Well, digitizing an SME doesn't have to be tragic. It doesn't have to be a disaster. But if you don't do your planning, you don't select your consultant and your vendors using a solid process, it's likely to be both. The way to approach this thing is heads up. Understand what your budget is. Understand what your support is. If you need to up the budget, do that early before you start the project. One other caveat on digitalization: once you set a plan, execute against the plan. Making major changes to the plan while it's in process is really expensive, and that's why it's important to put all the effort you can into the planning up front. Understanding. And here's where a lot of companies get let down is they don't understand the dependencies that surrounds the process that they're implementing, and those dependencies are killers. You don't want to be halfway through an implementation and find out you've shut down half the company, or suddenly the CEO can't get to his email. I've seen, by the way, it's surprising how many times that's happened. So really drill in and understand the dependencies. Do your research. Talk to other people that have gone through this. Learn from their mistakes, not your own, and you'll get through this. And if you do this well, you walk away with 100% of the benefit and a little of the downside. If you don't do the planning well, if you don't do the selection well, then odds are it's going to be a catastrophe, and maybe your final catastrophe. Turnover on CIOs is relatively high, and one of the reasons it's relatively high is inadequate planning. And in SMEs, you often don't even have CIOs. But the blame will certainly fall on whoever made the decision, and you can certainly point at the consultant and the vendor as much as you want. But if you're the one that selected them, you're still going to be screwed. So at the end of the day, the goal is to not be screwed. Get the benefits that you want from the technology and the effort, and the way to get that is by planning up front, doing as much planning up front as you can, and getting people that are poster children from Dunning-Kruger the heck out of the process. Experts that aren't experts, you don't need. None of us need them, and that goes across to everything from healthcare to our personal and private lives. You want the experts on board, the people that are making the decisions, to be fully knowledgeable about what they do, not just being able to play them as if they were on television. It is important that the competence comes with these decisions, and assure that competence up front, along with the planning, and again, figure out your dependencies. You're going to want to make sure none of those dependencies come back to bite you during the deployment.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. What's your concluding remarks for today?
Well, being the vice presidential candidate this election season for the United States Transhumanist Party, plug, had to get that in. I have to deal with the future surge, or some would call it the technological singularity. And really, it's a wide open question where it's going to go. Are we going to have an unrecognizable, user experience of civilization in 10 or 15 years? We don't know, but we should be prepared for it. All these mega trends of cognotech, infotech, biotech, and digitech. I forgot the fourth one. I think it's anyway. These things are going to blindside us if we're not prepared for them, and that we could end up getting knocked back to an 1850s style of Amish civilization, or with some major disaster. And should your business go away in that case? Not necessarily. I think we could form a kind of human union. Like we could digitize a twin model of how would this business work in the absence of technology, or in the absence of technology we're familiar with. There are some people that say the archaeological evidence shows that before the Ice Age, there was a society basically that was at like an 1850s level society, and it got knocked back by a comet impact or some kind of a catastrophe. And there are actually two schools of thought. There's the uniformists and the catastrophists that look at history. They say, well, history pretty much goes along, and yeah, catastrophes are the exception, but we can plan for the future by this uniform pattern of events. And the catastrophists would say, no, there's actually this punctuation of relatively periodic catastrophes, whether it's maybe our sun is having variable star micronova events, or we get comet impacts, we go in and out of the galactic plane. We don't know. It's these are open questions that need further research, and they need good minds on them. But I would say they are still worth planning for, and we can use digital tools to plan for them. So keep your ear to the ground, keep your mind open, and use science, and listen to people like Rob. He knows what he's talking about. I'm glad he's here.
Thank you everyone for joining today's session. This is an excellent session. I want to give thanks to all of our speakers, Mr. Rob Enderle and Mr. Daniel, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Especially, we are working for emerging economist peoples, and we are developing our business incubations. We are working with university grant commissions. We are working with a lot of interesting area like university, like corporations, and many more interesting places. And recently we just finished our entrepreneurship summit, and we invite around 600 entrepreneurs in our summit, and these are the peoples, those who continuously get support from your speech, from your contributions, and I believe that the more you contribute, you can help lot of entrepreneurs, lot of emerging economy peoples. This is the progress of World Talent Economy Forums. World Talent Economy Forums become the partners of human revolutions, from Chittagongs to Dhaka, from Delhi to Gujarat, from Malaysia to Singapore, from China to Nepal. Everywhere we are contributing through our dialogue through our business incubation, through our research and innovations. We have very important conference coming October on Nikola Tesla Technology Conference. I believe all of our dialogue, all of our activities will help millions of people, and definitely your contributions is priceless. I want to give special thanks to all of our speakers. Thank you, bye bye, and take care.